弟兄姊妹平安。
Peace be to all of you, brothers and sisters.
我想請問阿 Jamie， 網上睇嘅 PowerPoint OK 哦？
Yes, yeah, thank you.
唔該你。今日我哋會睇一個嘅題目，講到滿心嘅感恩。
Today we're going to touch on a topic full of gratitude.
因為咧今11月份咧掛傳日曆咧嘅係講到呢一個嘅題目。
For the hanging calendar, for the month of November, this is the theme that we touched on.
我唔知你中唔中意打網球？
Not sure if you like playing tennis.
如果你中意打網球，你就算唔中意打網球，可能你都識呢兩個人啊。
So even though you don't like tennis, you probably, know these two players.
個波唔大啲 ，OK， 明白，好啊。OK， 呢個教幾多 ？50， is that OK？
I can't see the PowerPoint.
OK， 因為你把聲喺在場比較細聲啲，所以我哋adjust。
Oh, okay. Sure. Yes. Yeah, I know. It's not as clear this morning when got my, so it feels, I have to turn on max volume.
OK， 你試下教唔教得大聲阿 Jamie 你嗰邊嚇 ？OK，
I'm max.
哦 OK， 佢最大，而家 OK 啦嚇，好啲啦，唔該晒。
Okay, good.
哦。 OK， 我要再 set 翻，因為頭先你 off 咗嗰個，唔緊要啊，唔好意思啊，我哋咧要 set 翻一啲嘅 PowerPoint 要重新再做過，因為頭先有少少技術上邊嘅出現問題。
So we ask for your patience as we try to reset the PowerPoint.
OK， 應該而家我哋讀手技工好快嘅啫嚇，咦？唔得，點解？
Yep, I can see it.
OK， good， 好好，而家應該 OK 啦嚇，唔好意思嚇。
Sorry about this.
OK， 應該得嚇 ，OK， 得 OK 啦，係咪啊 ，Jamie 嚇
Yes, yeah, I can see it.
唔好意思啊，唔好意思大家嚇，啱啱有啲技術上面嘅出錯嚇。咁啊，如果你認識阿費特拿同埋阿拿度。
If you know of these two tennis players like Federer and Nadal,
你會知道咧，佢哋兩個咧有一段時間咧，一係你就攞第一，一係佢就攞第一。
So as you know, for a period of time, either one will become first or the other would become first.
但係咧，人哋唔識嘅話咧，就以為呢兩個人咧好似死對頭啊。
So for people, who didn't know that, they thought like these were like fierce competitors with one another.
但係咧，如果你認識呢兩個人，呢兩個人其實好 friend 嘅。
So if you were to know them, actually, they are quite friendly with one another.
特別喺 pandemic 早期嘅時候咧，
Especially, at the beginning of the pandemic.
佢哋流出佢哋兩個人啊一個嘅對話。
And certainly, now, we came to know a dialogue between them.
咁啊，應該如果冇記錯咧，就應該阿 Federer 啊，就用啲social media， 咁啊打個電話同阿 Nadal 傾偈，哇 Nadal 好奇怪啊！
So apparently Fedora at the beginning of the pandemic, he utilized the social media and perhaps, might have called Nadal.
佢哋唔係講打 tennis，
Certainly it wasn't about playing tennis.
佢哋係講緊點啊你嘅情況你哋嗰度嗰個疫情好嚴重啊，你哋屋企點啊？咁我係好溫馨啊！即係你估唔到兩個大男人會咁樣講嘢。
So apparently, Federa's, was an inquiry about how things were. Apparently he heard that, the pandemic was quite kind of spreading quite fast. So it's interesting, like two grown men kind of showing some concern for one another.
中國人有句説話啦，叫做患難就見咩啊？真情。
Apparently, there's also a Chinese idiom that said, a friend in need is a friend indeed.
嗱，咁所以喺患難裏邊就睇到兩個人嘅情義係點樣。
Apparently, it was during adversities that, you learn about the quality, of the relationship.
咁其實箴言裏邊有一句咁樣嘅説話，佢話朋友乃時常嘅親愛，但弟兄為患難而生。
Apparently, in proverb, a friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity.
當好多平時冇事嘅時候，我哋好似好多朋友，但係喺患難裏邊，佢仍然同你一齊啊！嗰個係你嘅兄弟。
So apparently, we might be going well with one another, but whoever who is by your side would be considered your brother.
好多時我哋喺困難嘅裏邊，我哋好希望有人幫助。
Certainly, when we are in the midst of difficulties, we would love to have some help and support.
所以有冇人幫助，好影響我哋嘅情緒。
Certainly, whether we have or not have help really affects, how we feel.
但係因為我哋好希望解決嘅問題。
Because of course we want to have the problem solved.
咁但係喺困難嘅裏邊，其實反映到一樣就係，好似頭先所講嘅説話裏邊嗰種彼此之間嗰種嘅愛。
Certainly, it was during an adverse time that the love in the relationship start to kind of comes off.
所以喺困難裏邊可以幫助我哋成長。如果我哋集中睇到，原來喺困難裏邊大家嗰種嘅愛係一件好美麗嘅事。
Certainly, adversity help us to grow, and adversity also help us to discern, the kind of love in between us, and that's a beautiful thing.
但係如果我哋只係集中睇嘅，我哋有冇人幫我啊？或者邊個可以幫到我？我哋可能睇到嘅時候，只係解決咗個問題。我哋如果有人幫，可能幫完多謝一句，跟住冇人幫嘅時候，我哋就會喺一個投訴嘅情況。
So, in a case that if we only focus on finding solutions at a time of adversity and we look for a solution, but, we probably neglect to see, we would complain, not having help.
究竟喺咁嘅情況，喺我哋嘅困難裏邊，有冇幫助我哋去成長？
So would that help? If we start complaining, would it help us grow if we only focus on just finding solutions?
保羅喺帖撒羅尼迦前書裏邊咁樣話。
So the Apostle Paul in 1 Thessalonians, he said,
佢話凡事謝恩，因為這是神在基督耶穌裏向你們所定嘅旨意。
Or he said, give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus.
好多時我哋就停喺第18節，但係好得意，如保羅跟住喺第19節話，不要消滅聖靈嘅感動。
Paul also added, do not put out the Spirit's fire.
如果你將兩者扯咗一個關係嘅時候，當我哋面對困難，如果聖靈感動我哋集中喺感恩嘅事情，我哋喺當中會有成長。
So apparently, if we put two to two together at a time of adversity, if we were to give thanks, to be grateful, that perhaps, the turnout would be quite different.
或者喺困難裏邊冇幫助我哋學習喺凡事上邊睇到神嘅恩典，可能我哋好快我哋就會落喺另一個嘅問題裏邊。
Certainly, if we didn't do this and to learn of God's grace upon us, even when we are in adversity, then we might have fallen into a difficult place.
或者喺我哋困難裏邊，我哋冇讓聖靈嗰種嘅感動、嗰種嘅提醒去引導你，反而好容易被我哋嘅時候，我哋嘅期望快啲搞掂，或者處理咗，跟住哎呀又可以自己擺回原形啦。
And certainly, if we neglect to see, and did not let the Spirit to kind of work in us, then perhaps, we would never learn this lesson.
詩篇116篇。
In Psalm 116,
詩人喺你會留意整個嘅詩篇嘅裏邊係講到詩人係面對一種嘅困難。
certainly, in the entire book of Psalm, the psalmist always mention of his struggles.
呢一種嘅困難唔係可以喺10月份嘅時候，我哋講到喺物質上邊。
Certainly, these struggles and adversity, it wasn't like what we talked about in October, mainly about supplies and provisions.
而係喺嗰種嘅個人嘅經歷嘅上邊。
Apparently, the adversity came up from the person's own experiences.
但喺困難嘅當中，詩人經歷到去向神呼求。
Certainly, at a time of adversity, the psalmist pray earnestly to God.
佢經歷到神聽佢祈禱。
The psalmist experienced, how God listened to his prayers.
但係你會留意到詩篇116篇一開始嘅時候，
But if you pay attention to at the beginning of Psalm 116,
佢一開始嘅時候，將一個好緊要嘅感受表達咗出嚟，佢向神話：我愛耶和華。
so apparently he shared very critical emotions at the beginning of this psalm. He said, I love the Lord.
我諗詩人喺佢嘅人生遭遇嘅經歷裏邊，學到或者領受到一個好寶貴嘅一個嘅禮物。
So apparently this psalmist, had learned from his very own personal experiences that he got such a precious gift
唔
from
單
God.
止嘅問題解決，
Not only his problems were solved,
而係透過呢個經歷，佢對神嗰種嘅關係又提升到一步嗰種嘅愛意嘅表達。
not only his problems got solved, but his love and his feelings for the Lord, have been elevated to a higher level.
弟兄姊妹，每一個人我哋都會面對困難，
Certainly for each one of us, it's almost inevitable that we will face difficulties.
好多時我哋希望個困難快啲走開，
A lot of the times we wish, the problems to go away quickly.
但弟兄姊妹嘅時候，當困難走開嘅時候，對你嘅基督徒嘅人生有冇成長？
Certainly when these difficulties were to vanish quickly, would that help, your spiritual life? Would it affect its growth?
有冇你更加對神產生更濃厚嘅愛意呢？
Would that allow you, to develop a greater loving sentiment towards
或
God?
者喺困難嘅當中，你更加體會到神對你嗰種嘅愛呢？
Or on the other hand, you would really discern God's love for you at your time of adversity.
加拿大嘅人好幸福，
So Canadians are indeed, thrive quite well, very blessed.
10月份我哋慶祝我哋嘅感恩節。
So in October, we celebrated our Thanksgiving.
其實11月份我哋都慶祝緊感恩節。
Certainly, in the month of November, we again celebrate Thanksgiving.
差唔多我哋有2個嘅感恩節。
So in other words, it's almost like we have 2 Thanksgiving.
弟兄姊妹，感恩節對你係咪產生一個更濃厚嘅對神嘅愛念？
Certainly, during Thanksgiving, would it help you, to have even a greater loving sentiment towards God?
可能嚟緊嘅呢個禮拜你唔記得咗係感恩節咩？但我自己記得係 Black Friday， 因為已經你準備定買乜嘢係咪？
Or perhaps you might have forgotten what Thanksgiving, is about. Our thoughts are pretty much on Black Friday, what to purchase this Friday.
我哋嘗試從詩篇116篇，我哋嘗試去睇一睇，從 詩人個人嘅經歷嘅上邊，去體會到神嘅恩典。
Certainly today we're going to study, Psalm 116, and from the psalmist's personal experience that, we will come to learn the gift, the blessings of God.
嗱，我哋試下一齊讀第3、第4節。
So let's read together verses 3 to 4.
經文咁話，一齊。死亡嘅繩索纏繞我，陰間嘅痛苦抓住我，我遭遇患難受苦。那時我便求告耶和華的名，說：耶和華，求你救我的靈魂。喺當中嘅時候，喺字裏行間，詩人表達到佢喺困難嘅當中遭遇患難同埋受苦。
Right here, the psalmist totally open and candid about the troubles and sorrow he experienced.
呢種困難令到佢裏邊嘅時候好憂愁。
So such troubles had caused him a lot of sorrow.
喺當中佢經歷到嗰種嘅痛苦。
And from the sorrow and the trouble, he experienced such sufferings.
究竟詩人面對乜嘢呢？
What was he faced with?
如果你睇第3節嘅時候，佢講到死亡嘅繩索纏繞我，陰間嘅痛苦抓住。
Apparently, he talked about in verse 3, the cords of death entangled me, and the anguish of the grave came upon me.
可能詩人去經歷一啲關於生與死嘅問題。
So apparently, the psalmist probably faced a life or death situation.
可能詩人經歷緊一啲嘅疾病痛苦嘅問題。
Perhaps, the psalmist could have faced with illnesses, sickness, and pain and sufferings.
甚至可能詩人經歷到病到會差唔多離世準備嘅離世嘅情況。
Or perhaps, the psalmist, had gotten so sick that, he was on the brim of dying.
所以好多聖經學者去睇呢一個經文嘅背景裏邊，佢哋就會聯想到可能呢個詩篇係希西家王去患病之後痊癒所寫嘅一篇嘅詩篇。
So apparently, some of the biblical scholars might have thought this psalm would be from the king Hezekiel, on just about after, he struggled with death over an illness that
因為喺
he recovered.
希西家佢經歷咗喺疾病，佢呼求神，神憐憫佢，俾佢多10年命。
When King Hezekiel was very sick, he prayed to the Lord, and the Lord answered him by giving him decades of life afterwards.
我哋唔知係咪希西家，但係可能詩人經歷到喺健康上邊一啲嘅遭遇。
So apparently the psalmist, we didn't know whether it's indeed the king's writing, but we learned that, the psalmist was quite sick, and fighting for health.
無論自己病又好，或者家人病，或者你愛嘅人去病，都係一種痛苦。
Whether you're ill or your loved one or your family, someone, got sick, it's such a painful experience, isn't it?
所以你發現張衛健都唔係唱好多歌，但係你僅記得一首歌，我只想身體健康，係咪？
So apparently, there was this pop singer, in Hong Kong who once sang a song, and the title of it is, the only thing I want would be good health.
你淨係記得佢係馬騮精啫嘛，都識唱歌啊，就係嗰首歌，因為好有感受。
So perhaps, it's as if he truly felt physical health, would be the single thing he wanted.
即係唔單止經歷身體嘅問題，第10節、第11節咁話。我因信，話我受了極大嘅困苦，我曾急速地說，人都是說謊的。
In verse 10 and 11, other than talking about his physical health, he mentioned, I believe I'm greatly afflicted, and in my dismay, I said, all men are liars.
詩人表達到另一種嘅痛苦，未必係喺身體裏邊去經歷，而係可能喺人際嗰種嘅關係上邊嘅遭遇。
Some mentioned suffering not only came from physical illness, but also coming from interpersonal relationship.
經歷到人說謊，
experience people's lives.
我唔知你有冇經歷過，你信任一啲嘅人，人哋佢出賣你。
So have you had that experience when you really trust someone, but later on you found that you got betrayed?
我哋咁上下經歷啊，即係我哋啲半白老翁，就會經歷到引誘人生。
Someone like myself that, living of half of a century almost, that I know, and I've learned this is the truth that, we will
喺
face
人生
these.
唔同嘅時代，特別喺你最信任最愛嘅人去傷害你，嗰種痛苦更加深。
So during, our lifetime that, maybe you got betrayed and deceived, by those who were very close to you, those, whom you love. It's such a painful experience.
弟兄姊妹，喺我哋人生裏邊，我哋唔知你有冇遭遇緊，或者遭遇過喺身體、喺人際裏邊出現嘅問題。
Brother and sister, I'm not so sure, up to your lifetime now, whether you have faced all these problems, whether it's with physical health and with interpersonal relationship.
如果你只係期望神將個問題扭轉，
If you only expect God to turn your problems and troubles around,
唔夠。
that's not sufficient.
詩人喺困難嘅當中，去經歷到神耶和華有恩惠有公義，我們嘅神一齊讀以憐憫為懷。
So the psalmist truly experienced at adversity, the Lord is gracious and righteous, and the God is full of compassion.
我冇錯，可能喺人裏邊睇唔到佢公義，睇唔到憐憫，但係放心喺神嘅裏邊你睇到。
Perhaps human being, would never be able to see, there's grace, there's righteousness, but in God, he's so full of compassion.
詩人經歷唔係自己係配得，唔係自己可以，哎呀，你做乜嘢以至可以讓神去幫你？全部都係因為呢位嘅神向你施憐憫。
So the psalmist fully realized it's not that we deserve help or, we did something to deserve help, but it's only and only because of God's grace and righteousness, his compassion upon us.
放心啊，神有恩典，
Be contented, God is gracious.
神有公義。
So he also is a righteous God.
單止咁，
And not only that,
詩人喺第6節話：耶和華保護愚人，我落到卑微嘅地步，他救了我。
in verse 6, the psalmist continued to say, the Lord protects the simple-hearted. When I was in great need, he saved me.
可能有時，
Perhaps at times,
哎呀，真係我哋好單純嘅啫嘛，係咪？
perhaps, we could be very simple-hearted, very naive.
啊，我哋唔知自己單純。當我哋俾人呃咗嘅時候，周圍嘅人話你乜咁蠢啊，咁笨啊。
So we didn't know that we are simple-hearted, but oftentimes when something did something to us and then we got upset and people would say, why are you so foolish? Then we know.
呢種純唔係罪嚟嘅。
But certainly, being pure and simple-hearted, it's not a crime, not a sin.
經歷到，哎呀，我自己都唔醒，我自己好蠢，我自己咁單純。但係放心，無論可能我哋係咁嘅時候，神會保守。
But certainly be contented, even though we are quite simple-hearted, but the Lord protects us.
弟兄姊妹嘅時候，你記唔記得約伯？
Brother and sister, do you still remember Job?
一個好愛神嘅人，一個好敬畏神嘅人，都遭遇一啲嘅遭遇。
So someone who loved God and who cherished God and obeyed God, but he also faced lots of troubles in his life.
可能佢都會同我哋一樣嘅時候，都會有埋怨，或者覺得唔知點解。
He could have complained like us, and ask why, certain things happened to him.
但喺困難嘅當中嘅時候，去學習去更深認識到神。
But certainly, at his adversities, he continued to learn and to deepen his knowing of
呢
God.
種認識唔係單係頭腦上面嗰種認識，而係喺生命裏邊嘅經歷去體會得到。
Certainly, it's not just head knowledge that he want to know about God, but it's through indeed his life experiences that, he came to deepen his knowing of God.
所以佢話：我從前風聞有你，現在親眼見你。
So he said, my ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you.
佢喺爐灰當中懊悔。
So, even, in ashes, then in dust, he repent.
詩篇116篇俾我哋第一個嘅學習嘅地方，弟兄姊妹，我哋喺經歷嘅當中，我哋係幫助我哋能夠對神有更深嘅認識，特別認識到我哋所信嘅神係一位又美又善嘅神。
So at adversity, basically, the first learning we have is really deepen our knowing of God's goodness, for us, his
你會
goodness.
同隔離講，
Speak to your neighbor right now.
你嘅神好美好善。
So our God, it's good and beautiful.
唔單止咁，
And not only that,
你留意第8節，佢話
In
主
verse
啊
8
你救我嘅命免了死亡。
so the psalmist said, for you, O Lord, have delivered my soul from death.
呢種嘅情免咗我哋喺流淚嘅情況。
And certainly, and to kind of like take away our tears from our eyes.
唔單止救咗詩人喺死亡喺流淚，更加免佢喺嗰種嘅跌倒嘅情況。
The Lord not only delivered the psalmist from death, from tears, and also from his feet from stumbling.
特別我哋頭先睇到嘅時候，可能詩人係俾人去出賣，甚至說謊去攻擊佢。
So perhaps the psalmist might have been betrayed, and people, had lied to him.
如果你試過俾人出賣，你試過信任嘅人去說謊，喺你人生會唔會有影響？
So certainly think about, if you were betrayed by those who were close to you or someone whom you trusted, had lied to you, would that have any effect on you?
可能會影響你唔夠膽再信人㗎啦。
Perhaps, it would definitely affect you that you no longer will trust people, huh?
或者喺你嘅人生裏邊，人與人嘅相處，成日都要豎起晒啲槓，去保護自己。
Or perhaps, interpersonally that you have learned to put your guards up such that, you don't want people to come close to you, to hurt you.
你怕唔怕蛇啊？
So brothers and sisters, are you afraid of snakes?
定我應該問你中唔中意食蛇？
Or to ask you, do you like
中國人有句
consuming
説話，
snakes? So there's a Chinese idiom that says,
睇你識唔識答下一句啊？佢話一朝被蛇咬，
so it says like, if one day, you've been bitten by a snake,
識唔識下一句啊？10年怕草怕井繩啊！
and apparently, you are, going to be afraid, for 10 years that follow,
如果
like
你曾
a
經俾
rope.
蛇咬過嘅時候，你俾條繩你都驚啊！
So even though if you've been bitten by a snake, then, now I'm just
可能
giving
你
you
而
a
家知道
rope.
點解你屋企人咁怕蛇啦。
So now I know why, I learned that people are so afraid of snake, even just by looking.
經歷可能成為佢一個好大嘅一個嘅絆腳石。
So such a personal experience encounter might have totally changed, how someone would behave.
改變佢做人嘅宗旨，改變佢人生嘅方向，豎起嘅槓，佢以為咁樣保護自己，其實最痛苦嗰個佢自己。
So apparently people might have changed their life directions or the way they live their life, but eventually, you know what? These will only hurt the person.
雖然詩人有咁唔好嘅人際嘅經歷，
So even though the psalmist had encountered such interpersonal hurtfulness,
但喺呢個困難裏邊，神幫佢渡過。
but during his adversity, God helped him to
所以
get through.
詩人喺第9節話：我要在耶和華面前一齊到行活人之路。
So in verse 9, the psalmist said, I may walk before the Lord in the land of the living.
我唔想再好似一個死人一樣，
So I no longer, like a walking dead.
再以前我願意揀選一條，我做翻一個人啊，
The psalmist chose the path of living.
一個有人性、有生命嘅一個人。
So, someone who has like human character and someone who has life.
你了解呢一個背景嘅時候，你就會留意點解詩人喺第10節話：我因信，所以我如此説話。
So if you understand that, you will see in verse 10, I believe, therefore I said, I am greatly afflicted.
冇錯，你唔知將來你會唔會再俾人類似嘅情況，可能會有。
Perhaps
放心，神掌。
Yeah, you might not know whether in the future you would be deceived again, but here he truly believes that, because everything is in the control by the Lord.
弟兄姊妹，你冇遇過一啲嘅人際嘅問題？
Brother and sister, do you or have you encountered any interpersonal
人
troubles?
成為你好大一個嘅絆腳石。
Had anyone, become such a stumbling block for
嗰
you?
啲人嘅表現可能傷害到你一段好長嘅時間。 如
So
果你唔處理，可能一生。
someone's behavior might have like affected you so much and even maybe changing your life once and for all.
但係弟兄姊妹，嗰啲嘅人可能唔知道對你咁樣嘅影響，但係最痛苦個係你自己。
Even though these people might not know what they had done unto you, but the most afflicted would be you.
你容唔容讓呢啲嘅人繼續影響到你走一條死路？
So would you allow these people or their behaviors to keep you in the path of the dying?
定係讓我哋再一次調校我哋嘅方向？
Or that, you would readjust
我哋要
your
揀活
life
嘅，
direction.
我哋要揀選活嘅路，揀選一條信心嘅路。
That we choose this path of the living and a path of trustworthiness, of faith.
保羅佢都經歷過一種人際嘅期望帶嚟嘅失望。
Certainly, the Apostle Paul had similar experiences of being hurt by relationships.
但係當佢話我要去該撒裏邊去上訴，
So he had once said that, I'm going to have to bring my complaints to Caesar.
要把呢個機會見證神，
And such that, I would utilize the
因為啲
opportunity.
人話好啊，你去啦。
So, people say oh, okay, all right, let's
當
go.
佢去到嘅時候，邊個喺佢側近？冇人，但係保羅冇因此灰心。
Yet, when Paul went, nobody was around him. But, Paul never lost his trust and faith.
保羅反而咁樣話：但願這罪不歸於他們。
Even he himself, had said something like, may it not be held against them.
唯有主在我旁邊加給我力量。
He said, but the Lord stood at my side and gave me strength.
經歷中好容易會失去一啲嘅信心，但係讓我哋喺經歷當中又尋回翻我哋失去咗一啲嘅信心，或者一啲正確嘅信念。
Sometimes, we might easily lose our faith, but if we were to be able to restore our faith, then maybe, we even, could learn something additionally from
詩
it.
人喺第12節作咗一個嘅發問，
So in verse 12, the psalmist, make of this inquiry.
佢係經歷到神，
So the psalmist experienced
佢經歷
God.
到成長，
So he experienced his own
但係
growth.
冇停喺呢一度。
But certainly the psalmist didn't just stop right there.
佢有一個咁樣嘅表達，佢話：我拿什麼報答耶和華向我所賜的一切厚恩？
He asked, how can I repay the Lord for all his goodness to me?
詩人佢感受到佢需要有回應。
So the psalmist learned that, he needed to have a respond.
佢需要有行動嘅回應。
And he certainly, needs some actions to show his as a response.
所以跟住詩人帶出有兩個好實際嘅行動。
So certainly, the psalmist, executed, two like actions at
我哋
the
一齊讀
very
第
least.
34節。
So verses 13 and 14, let's read it together.
我要舉起救恩嘅杯，稱頌耶和華嘅名。我要在他眾民面前向耶和華還我的願。喺第13節裏邊嘅時候，佢講到話，我要舉起救恩嘅杯。
In verse 13, he mentioned, I will lift up the cup of salvation.
當我哋經歷到神嘅時候，最好嘅回應係咩啊？去見證神。
So once after we experience God, the best way, is to testify for
喺
God,
患難當中嗰種嘅拯救。
to testify God's salvations during a time of adversity,
神喺永恆嗰種嘅拯救嘅價值。
and certainly to bring out the value, of God's eternal salvation for us.
弟兄姊妹，你有冇經歷過神拯救？
So brother and sister, have you experienced God's salvation for you?
弟兄姊妹，你有冇去回應？
Have you
俾你嘅
responded?
拯救？
Have you responded to God's salvation for you?
詩人喺第15節話：
So the psalmist in verse 15, it said,
在耶和華眼中看聖民之死極為寶貴。
so it mentioned precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his saints.
有啲解經學家話，
Some biblical scholar make of this. So certainly, God didn't take it easy, when the death of his saints.
但有啲有另一個諗法喎，
Some others,
好寶
had,
貴啊，所以神要你死。
so you're so precious that, maybe God wished for your death as well.
但無論我哋死唔死，
But whether we die or not,
經文係提醒我哋，我哋嘅生命喺神嘅手中如此嘅寶貴。
but it's reminded us once again, our lives, it's so precious, in the eyes
好
of the
擔
Lord.
心你嘅生命嘅長短，
So never, to be worried about the length of your
反
life,
而喺當中去找緊你自己嘅身份係神嘅僕人。
but certainly, it's important that you seized hold of your status. You're being a servant of God.
以至喺你嘅困難嘅當中，好好嘅見證神。
So even though in a time of adversity, your job, your role is to testify for God.
弟兄姊妹，喺福音書裏面記咗一個好得意嘅人物，
Certainly in the gospel books, we learn of such an interesting figure.
叫撒該。
And Zechariah,
呢個撒該喺佢個外貌嘅裏邊，應該又矮矮地咁啊，所以佢又見唔到耶穌，又想見耶穌，所以爬上樹裏邊。
so Zechariah, in terms of his outer experiences, he was a short guy. So when Jesus, he learned that Jesus was coming, so he climbed onto the tree to want to take a look at Jesus.
但耶穌見到佢，
So Jesus saw Zechariah,
耶穌冇嫌棄佢，
and certainly Jesus, did not mind his
敲詐啲人，
statue. Mhm.
因為佢專敲詐人而富有。
Because Zacharias, tended to kind of demanded money, like, for people, kind of extort people. Yeah.
耶穌見到佢就即刻同撒該講：撒該，你下嚟，我今晚要去你屋企。
So when Jesus saw Zacharias on the tree, so immediately Jesus said to him, so I shall, be, coming to your home tonight.
但係當喺撒該接待耶穌嘅時候，周圍嘅人咁話：
So when Zechariah, took Jesus to his home and gave him a reception, so people around were saying this.
你都要接待佢，你都去佢屋企。
So they were criticizing Jesus. Wow, Zacharias was such a sinner, and you even would go to his house and yeah.
撒該同即刻嘅回應係咩？
What was like Zacharias' immediate response?
我把我所有嘅一半俾窮人，我如果我打咗誰，還佢4倍。
So anyhow, he immediately said, whatever I distorted or I extorted from people, I would give half of them back, or, even like for those it was really bad that I would repay them.
有好大可能咧，即係要留翻啲會計、讀會計嗰啲計一計，即係好大可能咧，就跟住撒該破產嘅啦。
So perhaps likely if you do the calculations for those of you who can, then he probably Zacharias would get into bankruptcy.
但佢經歷到耶穌嗰個救恩，比過去去追求以為錢俾佢嗰種嘅滿足更為寶貴。
But Zacharias found, the salvation from God. It was much more precious than what we had obtained, for himself in terms of like through extortion.
耶穌話：今日救恩就臨到呢一個家庭，因為呢一個亦都係亞伯拉罕嘅子孫。
Certainly, Jesus said, today, salvation had reached upon this house because Zacharias was a descendant from like Abraham.
撒該俾我哋一個好寶貴嘅信息。
Certainly, Zacharias sent along a very precious message.
你以為我哋幾差幾軟弱，或者周圍嘅人覺得你點差點軟弱，神都可以拯救你。
Certainly, no matter how you or others consider you as worst of the worst, but God also, sends along salvations, to these people.
但係冇忽略，當神拯救你之後，我哋只好好好去見證神。
So, but never to forget that once we've been redeemed and saved, that, we have to kind of like testify, for God.
最後第17節。
So, approach ending like verse 17.
詩人喺第17節裏邊作另一個嘅回應。
The psalmist also in verse 17 mentioned of
佢話：
his
我
new
要
direction.
即係為祭獻給你，又要求告耶和華嘅名。
He said, I will sacrifice a thank offering to you and call on the name of the Lord.
詩人喺當中嘅時候，佢帶住一個猶太人嘅背景，去用獻上一個感恩嘅祭。
Apparently, this psalmist coming from a Jewish traditions, he know that, he would have to sacrifice a thank offering.
可能佢猶太人嘅背景，可能一啲嘅牲畜嘅獻上。
Perhaps, from the Jewish tradition, he might have to sacrifice an animal for this.
但係你留意，詩人唔係淨係停留喺金錢物質上面嘅回應。
But certainly, pay attention, the psalmist never just kind of focused on just materialistic offering.
你會留意咧，喺第19節最後嘅時候咧，講到你們要讚美耶和華。
But pay attention, almost, at the end of verse 19, that, he mentions, praise the Lord.
最好嗰種嘅感恩就係將向神發出一種感謝。
So the best Thanksgiving, would be to really, openly, like to praise the Lord.
而呢種嘅感謝讚美唔係單係物質上邊，而係內心裏邊，甚至呢種嘅內心係願意有於內形於外，喺眾人面前去帶動一種感恩。
So, this kind of like giving thanks, it's not just like, lip service or like just open, like, but it's kind of radiating from inside of him and outside and being willing to testify in front of people.
弟兄姊妹，
Brother and sister,
咁樣話，
in the book of Hebrews, it says,
我哋一齊。
let's read together.
我們應當靠着耶穌，常常以頌讚為祭獻給神，這就是那承認主名之人嘴唇嘅果子。只是不可忘記行善和捐輸的事，因為這樣的祭是神所喜悅的。詩人喺當中帶出嘅時候，基督徒我哋需要咩啊？常常以頌讚為祭。
Apparently, the psalmist reiterate again, we always have to praise, as a sacrifice to
一
God.
個人經歷到神最好嘅係咩啊？係常常去頌讚神。
So for someone, who's been helped by the Lord, we got to sing praises, to God.
唔單止頌讚，
And not only offering
我哋
praises,
行善，
that, we also have to do
我哋
good
宣書。
and to share, with others.
弟兄姊妹，呢一種係詩人去經歷神嘅時候裏邊產生嗰種嘅回應。
Certainly, these are the actions from the psalmists who kind of like felt totally grateful of God's kind of provisions for him.
詩人喺困難裏邊學曉凡事去謝恩。
Certainly, the psalmists learn even at a time of adversity, how to be grateful and to give thanks.
如果一個人學唔曉感恩嘅時候，佢人生裏邊成日都咩啊？我要得到，多謝一句，跟住我再要。
Yeah. For those, who fail to learn these lessons of being grateful, these people, would be constantly asking and asking and always asking for more.
內心裏邊成日都覺得好似好唔夠，或者好容易好好似我哋呢排成日睇以色列人好軍部，去投訴，去埋怨。
So always kind of feeling, there's emptiness, there's inadequacy inside, just like, for some of the Israelites thinking that, they are blaming, they're complaining about what they don't have.
喺困難裏邊
At a time of adversity,
係一個最好嘅機會，讓我哋能夠體會我哋所擁有嘅唔係必然。
so apparently, when at adversity is the best opportunity for us to know, what we are lacking.
都係恩典嚟。
So what we have, is all grace.
弟兄姊妹，嚟緊星期4、26號係美國嘅感恩節。
So coming week, November 26th, it's Thanksgiving, the American
我
Thanksgiving.
覺得值得俾我哋一班加拿大人，我哋啲善用下呢一個感恩節嘅時候咧，我哋從另一個角度去有反省。
Perhaps, for us Canadians, we could certainly take advantage of this American Thanksgiving for us to reflect upon.
10月份我哋感受到神好多物質上邊嘅供應，第11月份嘅時候，我哋要諗一諗，神喺我哋嘅經歷嘅裏邊，過去一段嘅日子有乜嘢俾我哋喺困苦嘅當中，我哋對神經歷到神嘅幫助。
So perhaps October, with the Canadian Thanksgiving, we kind of like learn about from a materialistic, but in November, it would be a good example or a good opportunity for us to reflect on our experiences, how and sufferings, this impact on
我
them.
哋嘅眼目唔係再集中喺一啲嘅物質嘅上邊，如果唔係，我哋就只係掛住 Black Friday 嘅啫。
And let's not put our eyes upon just materialistic things, because then, what we focused on would be just Black Friday.
即係好 confused 啊！通常 Black Friday 啲人都唔中意，但係11月份嘅 Black Friday 咁中意嘅。
For most people, they don't like, kind of Black Fridays, but somehow for November, people seems to pay a lot of a lot of attention onto it.
如果我哋喺困難裏邊能夠有成長，我哋每一日唔單止10月份有感恩節，11月份有感恩節，我哋每一個月都經歷到感恩節。
So certainly, at adversity, no matter, which month that we're in, but adversity brings along
因為
growth.
你同我學到滿心嘅感恩嘅寶貴。
For you and me, we've learned, to embrace gratitude fully.
困難可以幫助我哋對神嘅美善有所認識。
Adversity help us to truly discern, God's goodness.
神喺困難嘅當中幫助我哋失去咗對人嗰種嘅信心。
At adversity, sometimes we lost faith and trust, for other people.
喺困難嘅當中，神幫助我哋去用見證作為一個回應。
But certainly, through adversity, God help us to kind of restore, our
更加
faith.
懂得去用一個感恩嘅心向神作回應。
And certainly, like the psalmist, using Thanksgiving heart, to respond to God's grace.
更寶貴嘅就好似詩篇116篇開始咁講，我愛耶和華。
And the best thing would be at the beginning of Psalm 116, at the beginning, the psalmist said, I love the Lord.
弟兄姊妹，過去你嘅經歷
Brother and sister, your past experiences,
有冇幫助你去更加去愛耶和華？
did it help you, to love even more, of our God, Jehovah?
弟兄姊妹，喺你嘅經歷嘅裏邊，有冇好好幫助你去成長？
So, did it like through your experiences, that help you to grow even further?
弟兄姊妹，人生好多嘅經歷，
So in lifetime, we encounter and have many experiences.
背後都有神自己嘅美意。
Certainly, there is, God's will, behind all of
呢
this.
啲嘅經歷可以幫助我哋去成長。
And these experiences all help us to grow,
弟兄姊妹，
brothers and sisters.
你有冇喺經歷當中成長？
If you grow, in your faith, in your spiritual life, among these
可
experiences.
能你面對緊一啲嘅經歷，可能令到你好痛苦。
Perhaps right now you are in such an experience that gives you lots of pain and suffering.
讓我哋轉向同神講，
Let us turn upon God and say to God,
唔單止我哋期望神幫助我哋能夠有好嘅結果，更加神啊，你幫助我，能夠喺呢個經歷裏邊，我得以成長。
and not only ask God to help us solve these issues, but also to ask God that, I wish, that I would grow, like, from these experiences.
或者求神幫助我哋喺呢個經歷嘅當中，帶動我哋同主講：主啊，我愛你，我更愛你。
Or maybe through these experiences that, it even like motivate and mobilize our hearts that, we would come and say to him that, Lord, I love
唱
you.
一首詩
I
歌
love
作
you
為
more.
回應。
So let's sing the following hymn as a response.
到來感謝恩主。Now thanks be all our God.